welcome back to your channel. First and foremost, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your unwavering support. Your encouragement has been the driving force behind the growth of this community, and I am truly grateful for every like, comment, and share. Now, let's dive into another intriguing story together. Gather round and get ready for another adventure. First story. This happened about 15 years ago. I was attending a really terrible university. I was working 4 nights a week and could afford little more than dinner each day. Rent and gas money really killed me financially. I really needed a job to survive. This all happened before I was working. It was a summer of my second year. It was one of the hottest days of the year. On days like that, I always went to study on campus to enjoy the free air conditioning in the library. They had a bulletin board where anyone could post any personal adverts and all that kind of stuff. I often checked the board because sometimes you could pick up some easy work. For example, you could tutor high school students who were looking for help and that kind of thing. Other times, there would be interesting advertisements too. Study a foreign language with me. I liked the sense of community. You'd see stuff like that. When I approached the board that day, I saw the following advertisement. Cleaner wanted to help clean a room. $50 per half day. Please contact Yamamoto. This was some good timing because I'd just taken a test and was about to have a week off. $50 was a lot to me. It would get me back to my hometown for a couple of days, I thought. As soon as I got back to my dorm, I immediately called the number provided. Hey, I'd like to apply for that cleaning job you posted, I said. The voice on the other end of the line responded, and it sounded slightly bewildered. Oh, right. What days can you work? I told him that I could work the full amount advertised. Oh, can you start at 9 a.m. next Tuesday? He asked. I agreed, and he gave me the address. It sounded like a residential address, and I guessed by his voice that he was a man in his 30s, and he sounded a little sick over the phone. The first day of work arrived. The morning was hot, but the sky was free of clouds. When I arrived at Mr. Yamamoto's house, I felt the breeze of his air conditioning and was worried that I was going to be working without one. I arrived 10 minutes early at 8:50 and rang the doorbell. A man came and answered it right on time. Come in, he said. It was a bit awkward. He was not one for chatting, and he wouldn't look me in the eyes when we spoke. I took my shoes off and followed him into the house. After we introduced ourselves to one another, he explained what he needed. It was pretty easy stuff. Help with moving heavy things, trips to the garbage dump, and some other light cleaning work. I was shocked by the things he was throwing away. They may have been trash to him, but to a student like me, they were treasures. He must have seen me admiring these things because he said, if you want to keep anything, it's yours. So I sorted some things into a sort of keep pile. I can't remember exactly what they were. I think there were a couple of games, some books, maybe a dirty magazine too. We were cleaning the room at a decent pace. I was kind of enjoying it, to be honest. Before long, his room started to look really good. Maybe we'll call it a day here. I felt him suddenly look my way. It looked like he was pretending to think about it a bit longer. And then he said, yeah, that's enough for today. Because I had worked a lot longer than half a day, he doubled my pay. I couldn't believe my luck. Then he said, "Are you free tomorrow for half a day?" I was over the moon to get another chance to make some easy money, so I agreed. I got on my bike with all my cool new stuff and told him that I was looking forward to working with him tomorrow morning. When I got to his place, I found the door open. I craned my head around the door and called out. He asked me to come in. He was grinning when I walked in. "I have your money here. I'll leave it in this envelope over here." He grabbed me by the hand and led me to another room. This was weird. His whole attitude seemed different. In this room, there was a walk-in closet. It was a heavy-looking suitcase, sort of like for travel. This thing's so heavy. I need your help to help me move it. This is how it's going to work. I'll push from behind, and on my signal, I want you to pull as hard as you can. Is that okay? He hopped over the suitcase and went into the walk-in closet. I couldn't see him beyond all the jackets, shirts, and all that kind of stuff hanging up in there. After a while, Mr. Yamamoto shouted, "Pull!" And as per his instructions, I pulled the suitcase as hard as I could. It weighed so much. What in God's name did he have in there, I wondered. It must have weighed almost 60 kilos. It was moving little by little, dragging slowly across the wooden floor. There was a clattering sound, and suddenly, the suitcase felt incredibly light. "Mr. Yamamoto," I called out over and over, but there was no response. What was this? Some sort of game he was playing? I didn't understand. There was still that rattling sound, but it had gradually quieted. 10 seconds or so had passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed the shirts and jackets aside, and I'll never forget what I saw. I saw Mr. Yamamoto in the closet, hanging from his neck. He must have been either sitting or crouching on the suitcase I had pulled away. He was suspended on the clothes rail in there. I ran over to help. I tried my best to pull the rope from around his neck, but it wouldn't budge. My mind raced with panicking, disjointed thoughts. Then one clear one came to me. I need something sharp to cut the rope. Mr. Yamamoto wasn't moving, and this was really bad. The rope was way too thick for scissors to be of any help. I had no choice. I had to try and get a neighbor to help. The police and ambulance services arrived. I was interviewed by the police at the scene. My parents traveled up, and when they arrived, I remember I just broke down and bawled my eyes out. Mr. Yamamoto was taken away in an ambulance. He lived through the night, but passed away in the morning of the next day. I couldn't save him in time. The least I could do for him was to finish the cleaning. I thought that would help me too, to do that, but it was so much. In the process, I made sure his apartment looked good. Though I had some strange compulsion to finish his final request, I went to take my payment. And inside the envelope was a note, as well as the money that he had promised me. The note revealed that he had been laid off. His company had been looking to make cutbacks. Shortly after, he found out his wife had been cheating on him with another man. His debt and loan seemed insurmountable to him, which is why he decided to just end things. At the end of his note, he apologized to me for all the trouble he caused me, explaining how he needed assistance to go through with it, and the cleaning job was just a ruse to get me to help. I showed this note to the police, and it put me in the clear. Police even let me keep the money. About a week went by, and Mr. Yamamoto's sister got in touch. He had long been estranged from her, and she revealed a certain truth that hasn't sat well with me, and I wish that she didn't tell me. Mr. Yamamoto was a believer in a certain dangerous cult-like religion. In that religion, the act of taking one's life is considered a terrible sin and is prohibited. If he did that, then you would be condemned to hell for all eternity. So he couldn't take his own life, and that's why he needed me. I was given $1,000 from his family and his estate for all the trouble that he had caused me. While I was grateful for the money, it couldn't erase the haunting memories of that day. I decided to use part of the money to seek therapy. I wanted to make sure that I didn't carry the burden of guilt and trauma for the rest of my life. I knew I wasn't a murderer, but the emotional scars were deep. Second story. This happened a few years ago. My husband's a truck driver, which meant he was always on the road. He would be away for months at a time. This happened just after my eldest daughter was born. It was really a tough time for me. I was busy with child care, my part-time work, and keeping the house clean. I wasn't sleeping much at all those days. The lack of sleep was making me agitated and easily annoyed. We lived in a tiny apartment, and the walls were thin. The neighbors were noisy too, but they were quick to get angry at any noise from our apartment. My daughter would cry and scream so loud that to avoid the neighbors' anger, I would take her outside into the alley, no matter what time of night it was. On the night in question, my daughter was screaming the place down. So as usual, I took her outside. I always thought the cool air would help. I think it was around 1 a.m. I was cradling my daughter in the dark alley. I was tired and had work in the morning. After about half an hour, she seemed to be drifting off to sleep, so I decided to head back to the apartment. I put my daughter in her crib and walked into the living room and sat down. I remember just staring off into space, thinking about how tired and lonely life felt. I sat in my dark living room with a glass of milk in my hand, listening to the distant rumble of a car outside. Then I heard a weird noise, something metal scraping against metal. It was strange, but I thought it was a street noise, possibly from the cars driving up and down the street. I couldn't afford to pay any attention, though it wouldn't stop. I knew that I should have just gone in search of the source of the sound, but I just didn't have the motivation to get up. So from my chair, I leaned forward and took a look. It sounded like it was coming from the front door. I heard that metal scraping sound, followed by a new squeaking sound. Then I saw my doorknob start to turn slowly. Someone was picking my lock. They might have been watching me in the alley or saw me go in. They must know that it's just me and my baby alone. My heart began to thunder in my chest, and my hand was trembling so much that I spilled the milk all over the floor. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Please don't come in. Please leave me and my baby alone, I thought. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I just kept my eyes focused on the door. The lock clicked. It was in that position to open. The door was now unlocked. I looked towards the chain. I usually forget to put the chain on the door. This time, I hadn't forgotten, and my body allowed me to breathe. I knew I should get up and turn the lights on. Maybe just doing that would be enough to frighten the intruder off. I don't know if that was just wishful thinking. I couldn't do it anyway. I was too scared to move. The handle to the door slowly opened, allowing streetlight into my apartment. I covered my mouth with my hand because I was beginning to hyperventilate. I had my other arm under my armpit, cradling my body, trying not to shake with fear so much. The door opened slowly, but stopped when the chain reached its full extent. In my mind, I was telling this faceless intruder that I had no money and nothing of value. Then, as if in answer to this prayer, as if by telepathy, the door slowly shut without a sound. Suddenly, as if I snapped out of some kind of hypnosis, I was awake and able to move. I hoisted myself up, but my legs were still like jelly. It was as if I was getting up in installments. I needed to get to the door and lock it. But before my eyes, the door began to open again. Whoever was out there wasn't giving up. I felt despair in my heart when I saw a huge pair of bolt cutters emerge from the door and aim themselves at the chain. The chain was the only thing keeping the intruder out. This is where you die, I thought. This is the end. Then another voice told me to protect my daughter. And that voice was louder, stronger. I screamed, releasing all this pent-up aggression and frustration. I didn't care what would happen to me, but I needed someone nearby in the building to hear me and help me save my daughter. I wanted to make as much noise as possible. I hurled my glass of milk at the door with all my might. The glass actually hit the bolt cutters, and the glass exploded everywhere. The owner of the bolt cutters seemed to be so startled that they dropped them, and they landed with a clatter at the front door. Then, from behind the door, I heard the sound of someone running as fast as they could. After a while, I crept over to the door and kicked those filthy bolt cutters out and locked it, shaking with adrenaline as I did. I found out later that the university student next door had heard my screams and came to check, but turned back when he saw that my door was locked and the lights were off. If he had knocked and come to check on me, there would have been no way in God's green earth that I would have answered. I cut my foot on some of the broken glass. It took about an hour for the tremors to subside, and that's when I decided to call the police. To my surprise, the police arrived in a few minutes, and as soon as I saw the officer's face, I started to uncontrollably cry. I know I sound like a total wuss, but to me, what had happened was so indescribably terrifying. I kept my hand over my mouth as I cried. I didn't want to wake my daughter. Thank God the intruder left the bolt cutters behind, because the police were able to track the culprit down and arrest him using this crucial piece of evidence. He was a known criminal, part of a gang which had previous arrests for burglary, violence, and even murder cases. I found some information about the severity of these lock-picking crimes, and it's terrifying how common they are. Would everyone remember to keep your doors locked and keep your chain on? It might just save your life. Third story. When I went back to my hometown last year, something really weird happened. It started when my neighbor across the street, Mr. Green, warned me about a suspicious person in the area. Apparently, someone was going around ringing people's doorbells late at night. Mr. Green said that they ignored the doorbell at first, since everyone in their house was asleep. However, the doorbell kept ringing, so Mr. Green's husband, Robert, got out of bed to see what was going on. He took his phone with him, so his wife could listen. He asked through the door in a quiet voice, "Who is it? Is there some type of emergency?" A man's voice responded, "Ah, I made a promise to Lily. Can you let me in?" There was no Lily in the house or in the Green family. And because it was a newly built house, there was no former resident named Lily either. So Robert explained this to the stranger at the door and told him to get lost. But it's a promise. I remember it well, the stranger said. Robert retorted, Well, I have a promise for you. If you don't go away, I'm calling the cops. He called the cops anyway, because the guy outside didn't show any signs of leaving. The police arrived quickly, but the man at the door was nowhere to be seen. So the Greens warned us to be careful in case he decided to come back. We spoke about it at dinner that night, and my parents made sure everything was locked when the sun went down. Later that night, my dad, William, and I were in the living room watching TV. It was just after midnight when the doorbell rang. Neither of us expected it, and I could tell my dad was just as startled as I was. There we were, two full-grown men, afraid of the doorbell. Before assuming it was the same weirdo from the Greens' house, I decided to check. We didn't have a way to see outside like those Ring doorbells, so I crept over to the curtains and pulled them back just enough to create a gap to look outside. Through the gap, I saw a man wearing a hat and a big dark brown overcoat. He was wearing boots, and his face was hidden by the turned-up collar of his overcoat. I couldn't really see his face. I watched as he pushed the doorbell again. My dad whispered to me not to get caught looking at the guy, so I immediately shut the curtain. This guy was definitely suspicious. There was no doubt. I mean, you wouldn't want a guy like that at your door, let me put it that way. We decided to call the police since the neighbors were already worried about the guy, but until the police arrived, we thought we would keep him busy. For about 3 minutes straight, he rang our doorbell. He was so persistent that my dad had had enough. He went out to the hallway and approached the door. He stood before the frosted glass and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm the guy who promised to meet Lily." "What's your name? Is this an emergency?" "I promised Lily. I really want to come in." The guy talked in circles. Of course, there was no Lily in our house either. If we told him that, though, he would just keep talking about his promise. It got us nowhere. He kept saying that he remembered his promise. While this was going on, I called the police discreetly. I wanted to see this guy get taken away, but he left before the police car arrived. We then heard knocking at the door, and it was a police officer. We have a door in front of the actual front door to our house, kind of like a porch. I was amazed to hear the knocking from the officer on our actual front door, and not on the porch door. When the weird guy was at the door, I was certain that the porch door was shut, and I didn't hear it open or close when he left. The door can only be locked from the inside. How is that possible, I wondered. It creeped me out, but my dad didn't seem to care all that much. He calmly explained the situation to the officer. He gave a really accurate description of the guy and informed the cop that this had happened to the Greens the night before. The officer said that he hadn't seen anyone suspicious in the area and that this guy knew how to get away quickly. However, there were footprints in the snow. The cop said he would follow them and see if he could find anything. He promised that there would be an increase in patrols and asked us to report back to him instantly if the guy came back. He cautioned us to try and avoid going out alone late at night and to double and triple check the doors to make sure they were locked. This cop wasn't new. He was older than my dad, and something about this situation had him spooked. I was getting really nervous. There was something very sinister about this guy looking for Lily. My mother, Anne, watched the whole thing. She was sitting on the stairs, and I turned to her and asked if she had definitely locked the door outside the front door, the porch door that I mentioned. She was adamant that she had. My dad could sense our nerves, and he tried to laugh it off. "Don't worry, guys. I'm sorry we couldn't get him this time." After we all confirmed and were happy that all the doors were locked, we went to bed. I couldn't sleep much, but I was relieved to see a police car patrolling the area at around 3 a.m. from my window. The next day, we heard that someone else in the neighborhood's doorbell rang. My dad was really angry at the police. He said they must not be doing their jobs right if they hadn't caught the guy yet. 4 more days passed when others in the area reported the late-night doorbell rings. Everyone said the same thing. A stranger came to the door asking for a Lily and asking to come in. He wasn't caught. The thing I find the weirdest about this is that not one person was able to describe what his face looked like. This stranger was the stuff of nightmares. I spent New Year's with my family and then left to go back to my home, worried for them. About a week later, I called my mom to check in on her and get an update on the situation. The house across the street from us found a note in their mailbox that read, "Lily's not here, but I found her. Thank you very much." The letters were painted by a brush, almost like calligraphy. I'm wondering if we'll get an apology letter too, or what it means if we don't get one. I'm sorry if this sounds like a mundane story, but imagine if it happened to you. A stranger whose face no one saw in the neighborhood, going around in the dead of night, talking nonsense and trying to talk their way into your home. I don't like it. And I don't like that he found Lily either. As time passed, the memory of the mysterious woman in the red dress began to fade, and life returned to normal. I moved on with my life, cherishing the lessons learned from that experience. The kindness I showed by returning the purse remained a small act of goodwill in my memory. To all of you who have followed along with this story, thank you for being here until the end. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe and like. I look forward to sharing more stories with you in the future. Until then, take care and see you in the next adventure.